Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We have a number of people on the line here today. My name is Ben Thomas with UST Training, and today's talk is going to be creating an effective UST compliance program. Again, Ben Thomas, president of UST Training, Inc., usttraining.com. We provide online A, B, and C operator training nationwide. And joining me today is Chris. Chris, could you jump in and say quick howdy from you?
Coming to you from Portland, Oregon.
Great. And I'm coming you. Thanks, Chris. Chris will be helping me moderate today's session. And so we will be taking questions pretty much at the end of the talk today. If there's something that you really got to ask, please feel free to jump in. Chris will be monitoring the chat. Please use the Q&A panel to ask questions. I've had to mute everyone's speaker or microphone so that we can kind of keep focused ahead here. So if you have questions, please use the chat feature there. This presentation should take about half an hour, 45 minutes or so. I think, see, we got 44 people on the line, Chris, and let's just kind of jump in. I did take a scan at the registrants today. It looks like there's probably a bulk of you are either going to be UST owners and operators with some service providers, and a portion of you are UST inspectors as well. This is actually a course. I've decided to kind of really mix things up today. Normally I talk to inspector audiences, I talk to operator audiences. We're going to kind of mix everything up today and see if we all can't learn a little thing or two to help us be more effective operators. I want to talk about leveraging the least used or least understood technique, which is basically motivating human behavior. This talk, I've done it before, and it sometimes some people don't really like it or don't understand it. So I'm going to just say right up front, this is going to be somewhat of a provocative talk in the fact that we normally talk about how to leverage technology, how to leverage rules and regulations, how to leverage kind of old-timey enforcement, how to leverage better equipment. But the human factor is where we really are interested in here at UST Training. We want to get rid of this pumping iron guy here. So a quick little bit about me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a former UST inspector, did my first underground tank inspections in Vermont in 1986 and 87. And I was a UST inspector, got someone on the line from Fairbanks today, Fairbanks and then Juneau, first in the cleanup side of things and then on to prevention. In 1996, I helped launch one of the first state UST agency web pages way back in 96. And provided the nation's first Class A/B operator training course in Oregon in 2003. Since 2007, we've had online A, B, and C operator training, and we've helped create state UST agency training web pages for Maine, Montana, Kentucky, and Idaho. And if you've seen our training videos on YouTube, go to YouTube and check out the Tank Savvy Minute video series. We have about 70 one-minute videos about UST compliance. And to date, for being a small company that we are, we've certified over 800,000 plus Class C operators and tens of thousands of AB operators since 2007. We're really feeling pretty excited about that. But today's talk is based on a book I read years ago, a training book called Don't Shoot the Dog by Karen Pryor. And it's, again, kind of shooting the dog is one way to make it quit barking, but there are other ways to make the dog quit barking. And so I read this book and got kind of intrigued by it. I wrote to the author, and the author said, wow, this is like an interesting application. I never would have imagined tank inspectors could use it for tank operators to kind of motivate and change human behavior. So I have a little write-up on our webpage, and I wrote an article. It's going to be a long time ago. I decided to kind of dust off this article from March 2004. I published this article called I Don't Train, I Enforce, or how Bob, the UST inspector, had to choose what was more important, compliance or enforcement. This went out to a national newsletter. I got some nasty replies back. Some inspectors didn't really like the idea at all, other than kind of the heavy hand of enforcement. And so I want to offer that today's talk is going to be about a bunch of different ways how to motivate UST operators. And then also I've got a section 2 for if you are a UST owner operator, how to motivate your employees. So this is kind of going to be kind of a behavior modification talk. So the author wrote, here's an unusual real-life human application of positive reinforcement principles. Those of you who know me, I like to work with positive reinforcement instead of negative. The author, Ben Thomas, wrote this article while inspecting leak prevention tank stuff in Alaska. he used some of the methods in my book to try to shape desired behavior. So instead of inspecting, citing, fining, or even closing tank operators, there's some other ways how to go about achieving compliance. Now, I've been explaining underground storage tank regulations for a long, long time in the industry, and you may or may not know, creating a good training program, yeah, I could read the regs and crank out a bunch of PowerPoint slides and kind of talk about what the rules and regs are. It is a challenge because here at UST Training, we're actually trying to change behavior. And so to do so, there's a huge challenge for a couple of reasons. First off, the rules are complex, right? And so there are all these rules and regulations. If you're a tank owner operator, does this even apply to me? And so do you train to a site specific operation, or do you train to everything? In other words, do you train the operator just to know about their particular system, or do you train them to every single rule and regulation? When we do online training, it's kind of tough to be site specific because we're not set up with that level of customization. A lot of operators still today don't know what they got in the ground. You know, I talk to operators all day long. Do I have double wall tanks? Do I have single wall tanks? Do I have suction? Do I have pressurized? They usually know what kind of tank monitor they got, but unless you really know what you got in the ground, it's hard to explain the rules. And quite frankly, it's hard to stay in compliance if you don't know what you got in the ground. We try to overcome that with operator training. There is a massive turnover rate. There's a number of convenience store attendees on the line here. And so how do you maintain that kind of institutional knowledge, and people are coming and leaving at kind of a revolving door rate? And so in creating an effective program for a company X, you need to kind of instill that, and that's hard to do. And kind of the crux of what I want to talk about today, simply knowing the rules won't make things better. When I did the first operator training class in Portland, Oregon in 2003, I thought if I could just like explain all the rules, things would kind of get better. And I quickly learned that simply talking about the rules doesn't translate into action. It doesn't translate into comprehension, doesn't translate into engagement. And so we try a different approach here by trying to motivate people to be doing the right thing. And if you're a UST inspector, I'm sure you know there is no such thing as a typical operator. I mean, even on the line today, we've got Indian tribes, we've got convenience stores, we have someone who has a zoo, Omaha Zoo with underground tanks there. There's hospitals operators on the line here. And so to create a training program that kind of speaks to all those different types of operators and all the different learning types, right? Some people learn visually, some people learn audibly. And so I guess what I'm saying here is that in trying to change behavior at our end, there are some inherent challenges, but fortunately, we've got a roadmap ahead of us. And so I want to consider tools used for changing behavior to achieve compliance. And so our job here at UST Training is really to kind of change people's behavior, make them going from not doing something or not doing something correctly to doing something correctly. And it's more than just simply explaining it, and it's more than just issuing them a notice of non-compliance. In our universe, it's not really understanding the UST rules, because what people need to know is, you know, what do I have to do? Why do I have to do it? And if I don't do it, what's going to happen to me? In other words, you know, the operators simply need to know that if action X is not done, there will be consequences for that. Either, you know, personally, I lose my job, I get in trouble, I get a fine, or the site is shut down, or, you know, there's leaks and spills into the environment. So I want to take a moment and kind of ask, how do you motivate your people? As a UST inspector, maybe you do a random site visit. You just kind of show up out of the blue and ta-da, there you are, and you're performing a compliance inspection. You might issue a field citation. If you are a UST inspector, I'd love to see what sort of motivational tools are at your disposal. It could, like I said, it could be a friendly reminder, it could be a surprise visit, it could be a compliance action. Or if you're a UST owner operator and you've got a ton of people to try to train, what sort of techniques do you use to get that point across? How do you motivate people? Please use the Q&A feature and just throw out a couple of pointers about ways you inspire that to do. And hello, Jeff from EA Engineering in Honolulu. That's great you're out there. Again, yeah, how do you motivate people to do an action, a UST compliance action? Please use a Q&A feature. Be brave. Let me know what you do. I have a general sense about that from being a former inspector and knowing a lot of inspectors. And I've also talked to a lot of operators over the years. Or do you not motivate people? Do you just simply like expect them to know and do this stuff? Please use the Q&A feature and let me know what you do. Okay, as a Fed inspector, we call the facility ahead of inspection time and open up that line of communication before we inspect. And so, Melissa, that's actually one of the behavior techniques we're going to talk about. So I'm glad to hear you say that. That's called putting the behavior on cue. Hey, we're coming out. That's great. That's a good example. Anybody else? Anyone else have any ways to which they motivate their people to be in compliance with UST regulations? Anybody else? Okay, talking, field training. So you're on site, great. Send out periodic letters. Okay. So you alert them that there are regulations coming, great. Walk through the system so they okay, so explaining what all this stuff is, that's great. Send out reminder. Okay, that's good. There's some good things to kind of chew on here. Our basic premise here for UST training for operators is not conveying knowledge or explaining the rules. And some people in the past have taken offense to that, or they take exception to that. So one of our students can say, my automatic tank gauge can find a 0.2 gallon per hour leak with a 95% probability every 30 days. That's the rules. But our premise here is to teach them roles and responsibilities and modifying behavior. The example below is, I used to ignore that beeping and blinking ATG. Now I check it every day and call my boss if there is an alarm. That's what we want to impart as a UST trainer. Not that they can recite the rules and regulations, but they actually convert that into an understandable action item, and they are motivated to do so. So Karen Pryor wrote this edgy book called Don't Shoot the Dog, and there are 8 ways to modify behavior. One is called shooting the dog. It's literally getting rid of the problem. The other is punishment. The third is what's called negative reinforcement, maybe a lesser form of punishment. The one method I don't fully understand is extinction. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm not a behavioral psychologist. I get excited about these motivational techniques. So I'll try to explain these methods as best I can. I think I know what's going on. So there are 4 negative and basically 4 positive reinforcement techniques. One is to train an incompatible behavior, have them do something so they can't do something else. Putting the behavior on cue, again, Melissa, that would be what we were talking about a moment ago, and shaping the absence of a behavior. Now, the book, Don't Shoot the Dog, says that this technique works basically on any mammal that's out there, that these are proven techniques that if you need to have poor behavior go to correct behavior. I guess the tagline is, there are no such thing as bad dogs. There are only bad dog trainers. So let's go with that notion, and we can talk about actually changing the motivation itself. So what I want to do, I've got a lot more, how do I say this? I've got a lot of inspectors on the line here, and so I'm going to talk about how inspectors can motivate UST owners. I'm also going to talk about afterwards how owners can motivate A, B, and C operators. And again, normally I don't kind of mix everyone together in one big group here, but those who know me know I like to kind of build UST communities. Everyone's welcome to the table, service providers, operators, inspectors. And so I want to, if this next section doesn't directly apply to you, think about how it maybe could somewhat indirectly. So how can inspectors motivate operators to comply? I used to issue a lot of notice violation letters back in the day. I used to issue heavy penalties and fines as an inspector. So I understand, the tough one. Let's say someone is not doing leak detection. Okay, they're not doing leak detection, and we want them to do leak detection. What I want to do, I recently gave a talk to the state of Wisconsin, so I pulled up some numbers of theirs. The Wisconsin technical compliant rate measurements. So over the course of a year, from October 1, 2021 to September 30, 2022, when they visited all the sites that they did in Wisconsin, all the state inspections, which is about a third of the state, 96% were in compliance with spill bucket requirements. 90% were in compliance with the flapper and alarm requirements. 94% were in compliance with corrosion protection, but the numbers plummet after that. 61% were in compliance with release detection. They weren't doing it. They weren't proving it. They weren't doing their annual ATG certification. When you combine the compliance rates of the total technical compliance rates, insurance, training, release detection, all the other stuff, the numbers are kind of tough. And this is actually common in a lot of states. So some things we're doing really well and some things we're not. In my world, release detection is one of the more important things to do correctly. And so we want to I want to think that if you were to explore some of the techniques I'm going to talk about today, we could significantly increase this number of 61% up. We want to be able to do release detection better. We want our compliance rates to be better. If you want a copy of your state's compliance rates, those are published at the EPA webpage, epa.gov/UST. And there's a summary they publish twice a year of the compliance rate. Some states do really good. Some states don't, could be doing better. Let's put it that way. So one method, as an inspector, you can get rid of the problem behavior. Excessive fines and red taggings can shut down a site. As a former inspector during the 1998 upgrade, I talked to a lot of operators who basically said, I can't do this anymore. You know, the fines are too much. The enforcement is too heavy. I'm just going to kind of get out of the business. And so basically getting rid of the problem, if they're not doing leak detection, one way to do it is to get rid of the tank operator, shut them down, they go out of business. It gets rid of the problem, but of the operator not performing leak detection, but the operator is now out of business here. So we no longer need to worry about release detection. This is obviously an extreme measure. And so in my career, having talked to thousands of operators around the country, most operators literally want to do the right thing. I've maybe run into one or two where my personal opinion, these people probably shouldn't be managing an underground flammable hazardous container full of liquid and probably shouldn't be in the business anyways. You would want to only reserve this when I think all else fails. Punishment, though, is maybe a more traditional enforcement tool that regulators have at their disposal. Issuing a notice violation letter. You punish the wrong behavior after the act has occurred as a reminder. This is a reactive behavior modification tool. You know, bad dog, you did something wrong. Here is a notice violation letter. You assume the wrong behavior will be corrected next time because they, quote, learned. I think this is where it's good to pause for a moment and think about the assumption behind a notice of violation, notice of non-compliant action. So someone does something, they're not doing leak detection. You give them a citation, they go, ow, that stung. I don't want to have that happen again. I will start doing leak detection properly. It does issue a penalty reprimanding the operator for not doing something. It doesn't make him or her do leak detection unless they kind of put two and two together and start doing it going forward. So this is a punishment thing for not doing something correctly. And sometimes, I'm not saying any one of these tools are right or wrong. I'm saying that some of these tools are better for the situation at hand. Punishment may or may not change behavior. Negative reinforcement is kind of maybe a softer version of punishment. An unwanted behavior is met with an undesirable response. You could have a red tag. There could be on-site financial responsibility. There could be a press release. I mean, a couple times a year, I see a bad press release in the paper about a company X that did something wrong, and now they're like in big time trouble here. And so that would be a way to negatively reinforce. You force the operator to do leak detection by having an unwanted behavior having an undesirable response. Maybe you have an issue of red tag. There's no fuel until the problem is fixed. Red tagging is an option that many state regulators have to shut down what are hopefully kind of tough luck cases. The The thing about negative reinforcement, and this is absolutely critical, it only works if the punishment is swift, nearly immediate, and relative to the bad behavior. If you take years and years to sort out a violation that eventually leads to a court order and it leads to kind of a penalty, by the time it kind of gets to that point, the operator has literally long forgot what the problem is. They're just out a bunch of money and they're resentful about it. And so whatever negative reinforcement action you have, it has to be immediate. It has to be cognitively connected to what the violation is. I mean, it should be really saved for significant violations. Like, I mean, if you're, I don't know, you have to go back and look at 3 years worth of leak detection records, and you are missing a leak detection record from 2 Julys ago, and you get a red tag and you're shut down. That kind of doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem to fit the crime, as it were. And so any negative reinforcement tools must be swift and must be relative to the bad behavior. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And all you really end up getting is a resentful operator. You don't really get the desired effect of wanting to change behavior, i.e. Doing leak detection. Extinction is kind of a strange one. You wait for the bad behavior to go away by itself. This is where you assume that they kind of know enough of what's going on and they'll eventually kind of come around to it. The problem with the extinction as a behavior modification technique, it only works if the operator knows what the good behavior is, what are the rules, and what bad behavior or bad results are, like the violations. Here at UST training, we spend a lot of time talking about, if you don't do this, then that will happen. And sometimes operators don't know that. I once, years ago, I almost didn't get my training course approved in a state, because when I asked to outline and share with the operators what the enforcement tools were, the state inspector is like, we're not going to share that. We need to have the discretion to like surprise them with a different enforcement method. And I said, well, but if they don't know what the goalposts are, how are they going to comply? And so that's kind of an example of it does. If operators know what's expected of them, you can probably have better results. The complexity of the tank rules can overwhelm the average operator, preventing them from knowing exactly what's required. I've talked to people who've taken the training who are smart and well-meaning people, and they're still, they got some questions about stuff. And so the rules are, like I said in the beginning, they're complex, they're varied, they're site specific, and sometimes it's hard to get the full scope of things. You can't change behavior if they don't know what is required beforehand. And so having operators know what's required up front, I think it's the state of Washington, or Oregon, they send out a little letter saying, we're coming, here's all the stuff we need. It's like, thank you. Okay, so now I know what the goalposts are. And so I have a much better chance of having a successful inspection because I now know what is expected of me. To assume any operator should understand every single underground storage tank regulation and have it in place and having done it effectively, it's kind of a tall order. The one I like is called training an incompatible behavior. Train an alternate behavior that prevents an undesirable behavior. One state years ago required all operators to submit a year's worth of leak detection records for agency review. If there was no leak detection history, they wouldn't get the state fund. If there was no fund, they wouldn't get a permit, then they'd kind of be out of business. So in other words, you had to submit your leak detection in order to get an operating permit, and that's how you stayed in business. And so you have to withhold something to change the behavior, if that makes sense. So the request for leak detection records is incompatible with not doing leak detection because the state fund is tied into the request. So here's where you can kind of be a little bit creative in thinking about ways to motivate people to do the right thing. Tie the technique requirement into funding incentives is often kind of a common motif. And Melissa, we were talking about what you said earlier, warn someone that something is going to happen or may happen, right? Sending alert to the operators before inspect them, explain coming and what leak detection documents you will need. And then you go back to your non-compliant states and sites and you say, okay, I put you on notice, now you have 30 days. And if you don't come back, then I'm gonna kind of up the enforcement mechanism. So here's a technique you can start off putting the behavior on cue, and then if they don't do it, then you go up to punishment or something like that. I believe the idea is to reduce inspection time. And so I've had many conversations with inspectors over the years. I can't tell, Billy that I'm coming and here's what I need, because if they know I'm coming, they're going to come out and they're going to be doing XYZ that they haven't done yet. I said that's the whole point. You're literally telling that you're coming, and if that's what it takes to get them to get all their stuff ready for you, fine. I mean, if they're, they can't like fake or make up stuff or, maliciously fabricate records. But if you are inspiring them to do that, I mean, the metaphor I have is that, when I see a police cruiser sitting in front of a billboard, I'm going to slow down and do the speed that I can. Yes, I should be doing the speed limit, but if I'm not, I've now been put on cue that needs to be in the front of my mind, that I'm going to do that correct speed limit. And I'm not blaming the cop for reminding me of that, I guess what I'm saying. Shaping the absence of a behavior is another great idea. We call that positive reinforcement. Issue a green tag. Hey, this operator is in compliance. Offer praise when something bad is not happening. I've literally had an inspector say, hey, nice release detection records you got there. I mean, it doesn't have to be, you can provide positive reinforcement for a job well done. Some states provide a tank operator of the month in their newsletter, highlighting an operator who, fixed their leak detection records. And so here's where you provide positive reinforcement. People know that they're doing a good job for that, and they're praised and recognized for that. They're likely to continue that. For those who complete work as assigned, disregard the fine. Good work is recognized or at least not ignored. And then lastly, the thing I want to talk about is changing the motivation. You need figure out what your operator needs to be motivated to, maybe they don't ever want to be in the press. And so that's their motivation there. Maybe they, so consider, I think it's state of Washington again, has an amnesty program. If you call and ask for help, enforcement is waived, within reason, as long as like the tank's not leaking or not something egregious going on. They call up and they say, hey, I could use a little bit of help here. I think I know what's going on. And then if you basically go to the regulatory agency, they will kind of cut you a little slack because you voluntarily went forward to them and asked for help. And so the result is that if they're motivated by avoiding a get out of jail free card, then they may do that. So that's the world of having some tools that inspectors can have. And maybe you're doing this stuff and it's already kind of working. And maybe you're like, wow, maybe that's not working. Maybe you're like, nah, these are a bunch of dumb ideas and I want to just stick with an enforcement fine book. Let's talk for a moment about operators not doing leak detection. So I go to a site and I look at the tank gauge, and I was at one the other day, and it's broken, and the door is swinging open on the Vita route, and the readout, which is just a bunch of inventory records, is like spooling into a big bucket that's got water in it. I mean, just a terrible mess. And so let's look at the maybe ways that owners and operators can encourage their employees to do leak detection properly. Shooting the dog, right? Billy is not doing leak detection. Billy no longer has a job. And so one way to get rid of the problem is to make sure that the person doing the job is doing the job. And if they're not doing the job, they're out of here. Punishment is another method. Penalize Billy for not doing leak detection. You can get a little creative here. Withholding perks and benefits, cannot be promoted. What are some things that would admonish Billy for not doing leak detection properly? You can see here, I mean, and they use these kind of inflammatory pictures on purpose here because that it doesn't really fix anything. It just penalizes Billy, which is not necessarily fair. Likewise, negative reinforcement. Let everyone know Billy didn't do leak detection. Extinction, hopefully Billy starts doing leak detection on his own, but really only if Billy has taken the training and knows how important it is and know why his job is tied to it. I like these ones here, like I talked about the inspector motivation. Train in incompatible behavior. Make a proper leak detection requirement up front so Billy starts doing leak detection. Billy literally can't do anything else in his job until he does his leak detection, right? So figure out something that without this basic requirement, then Billy at the C store, whatever site he's at, is doing it correctly. So figure out a way how to prevent anything else from happening until release detection is being done. Maybe have them come in first thing in the morning, sign in. The very first thing they do is they check the tank monitor, they fill in the log, and then they can proceed on with the rest of their duties here. So figure out something that is incompatible, that they can't go this way because the bridge is really out. I kind of like this one here. Put the behavior on cue. Billy, I might be checking on your leak detection records, a random audit or something like that. Or, I'll pop in every once in a while at my own discretion. I'll figure out, I want to make sure Billy is doing their work correctly. Actually, I'm thinking of a great example. Years ago, I talked to a in Atlanta, Georgia, and they were tired of their inspectors having maybe delivery incidents. There's a spill on the ground or some problem happened during delivery. And so what they did is that they basically told everyone, if you have an incident-free quarter of a year, you would win some sort of prize. And if you had an incident-free year, your name would go into a raffle. And if your name was pulled, you got a brand new pickup truck. Like huge motivation there. They hired someone to drive around and randomly spot and look at deliveries to make sure that the drivers were doing it correctly. And so the drivers are put on cue. There might be someone kind of watching me, so I'm going to kind of do my job, and I'm motivated to get a pickup truck. And one guy apparently in the company won like a pickup truck like 2 or 3 years in a row or something like that. Very creative way how to go about doing it. And I was really admonished by this company because I was talking about, sloppy drivers and drivers not caring and paying attention. He's like, look, here's what we do, and how dare you say we don't think about this? And so that's another great example. So there's a motivation there's a prize at the end of the tunnel, and then there's a random checking to make sure that people aren't just, making up their delivery records and hiding incidences of problems during delivery. Another one I like to do is shape the absence of a behavior. Public praise. Hey, Billy did leak detection correctly. Congratulations, that's great. And there's actually software apps you can use now that go on your phone, and you can literally do little attaboy, little attagirl messages and push them out to your team here. And so Billy responded to this alarm on September 13th, and thank you so much. You saved the company thousands of dollars. Here's a gift card to Cabela's, thank you very much, kind of thing like that. And so I'm big time on shaping the absence of a behavior. Another example I have, when we started doing this here at UST training, a certificate of completion for an ABC operator is kind of a big deal in our world. And so we've recently added little ticker tape, so little splash confetti when someone gets a certificate. We toot the horn, we kind of make a big deal. Welcome, you're an AB operator. When I did training years ago in Puerto Rico, live training, at the end of the day, every single person, we had like 100 people in the room, and one at a time, people would come up and we'd hand them a certificate, shake their hand, everyone would applaud. It was kind of like a big deal, right? And so we tried to make positive reinforcement a tool to make people feel a sense of ownership and pride in what they're doing. And if you are recognized for good behavior, i.e. I kept a tank from leaking or I responded to an alarm, then that's a valuable employee. They'll probably stick around, and you should get better compliance out of it. Payroll raise, gifts, prizes, recognition. I'm a big fan of all those sort of things. And hopefully that's something anyone here on the line could think about implementing for them. What makes Billy want to do his job? Maybe Billy only cares about money. Maybe Billy wants recognition. Maybe Billy wants a promotion. Figure out what motivates them and leverage that, and use leak detection as an example to motivate people to do that correctly. Again, praise, recognition, perks, these are all things people can do to ensure leak detection happens. And I'm only using leak detection as an example because it's one of our more elusive things, and the compliance rates tend to be a lot lower than other portions of the UST program. So basically, motivation of inspectors, owners, and operators can be used for UST compliance. You're already doing some sort of motivational behavior, because we do want to changing behavior should change compliance, right? So, but there's more than one ways there's 8 ways how to go about motivating. Some are positive, some are negative, some are essentially negative because of repeated non-compliance or kind of a gross disregard of the regulations. But a lot of times people just need, like, what do I need to do? And what happens if I don't do it, and things like that. So be thinking about some of the more positive reinforcement tools here. Determine what method or methods is based on the situation. There might be kind of a scale there. If you see yourself in the position of kind of being creative with trying to motivate people, then you might want to be thinking about some of these other techniques other than just the kind of the heavy hammer, the shooting the dog kind of thing. So again, there's 8 different methods how to do this. I kind of talked about why it is. Years ago, I wrote an article called "Don't Shoot the Dog," or "I Don't Train, I Enforce." And I do want to offer that sometimes the inspectors and the operators do need to decide what's more important, enforcement or compliance. And I think compliance can be won a number of different ways. Does anyone here have any ideas that they could maybe either try differently or maybe even share? Do any of these techniques ring a bell to you that maybe you're already doing? Maybe you didn't realize you were putting the behavior on cue, or that you were offering positive reinforcement and praise for a job well done. Is anyone currently doing one of the methods that we talked about? If so, please put a couple notes in the Q&A feature, please. I do believe that understanding what motivates operators can have a direct effect on compliance. Again, it's something we don't really talk about a whole lot. We focus on the equipment, we outsource it to online services. We use our typical enforcement tools, field citations or firing people for not doing a good job, but there's a whole bunch of different ways how to go about inspiring people. I do think too, things like positive reinforcement are good for worker retention. If the turnover is really tough in the C-store world, then maybe inspiring people to want to stick around. I read somewhere not too long ago that a lot of the reasons why people quit jobs is because they don't feel recognized or appreciated. And so if you recognize and appreciate them, you could change behavior and keep your turnover down, which should increase your bottom line, because turnover on a job typically costs about 20% of that. An additional 20% of the employee's income goes towards training the new person. So it's really inefficient to keep on losing people. So this is maybe also a business improvement technique as well. Anyone else have any methods that they're currently using that are like some of the ones we talked about today? Or does anyone have questions about the methods that I talked about, the 1 through 8 methods here? Kermit does his own monthly inspections and lets them know when I'm coming. Okay, so putting the notice on queue, that seems to be kind of a popular one. Use the Q&A feature if you have any questions about any of the methods that we talked about, or maybe what you're currently doing that might be one of the 8 methods, or maybe something you might even want to try and experiment with. I recently gave this talk to a bunch of inspectors in Wisconsin. Half the group was like, nah, I'm going to stick to my fine book. The other half was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Maybe I'll give it a try. And I was encouraging the state to do a experiment and just have some of the group use the heavy enforcement method, some using the more creative 8 behavior modification techniques, and see which one, if any, came out better. Mike said, change motivation for operators and set up a repair compliance hotline. Okay, yeah, so you're basically letting them know that there's a safe place they can go to get help. Is that what you're saying, Mike? That's helpful to know. Anybody else? Tim Wood, I think I've talked to you before. Virginia Department of Transportation. You guys have an interesting challenge that you've got fuel sites all over the state, and what Department of Transportation does is, keeps the roads running, but they're not necessarily, fuel handling experts. So I think if you're with a company whose primary job is not to kind of manage fuel, but fuel kind of runs your business, you have the additional challenge of trying to impress upon them the risk that their fuel systems pose, and to be a little creative in how you motivate those people, because it's not really part of their regular job. Kermit likes the reward certification. Okay, yeah, okay. And so, Mike, you were talking about having a compliance request hotline. That's kind of what I talked about, whereby you've you reward people for kind of being upfront with you, so you can correct it, and you don't have to run every single person through like a enforcement pipeline. I understand the challenge for certain state agencies. You're literally bound to certain enforcement protocols, and I'm not saying for an instant you want to kind of ignore bad behavior. I'm just saying is if you want to shape long-term behavior, there's basically more than one way to skin a cat. Again, so anything you might do differently, anything you would recommend, anything you think you're maybe already doing and didn't know it was a behavior training technique? I decided to do this talk in part because there's, again, we spend so much of our time kind of explaining the rules and explaining the equipment and service providers and all that sort of stuff. But, at the end of the day, we're what do we got here? 51 humans on the line here. We all are human. We're all subject to foibles and motivations that, make us who we are. And so I think if we have a little bit of a deeper appreciation for what motivates us, we can maybe achieve compliance outside of our normal arena of technologies, rules, regulations, and speeding ticket enforcement.
Earlier, Donna mentioned sending out reminders of what operators should be doing and what they need to be in compliance. And some others look like they had similar things that
Okay.
they do, sending out training briefs. A couple of people mentioned, I'm saying.
I want to think that letting operators know what's expected of them, I mean, that would just make sense, would have an intrinsic value. I've gotten in a lot of disagreements over the years about announced versus unannounced inspections. And I think announced inspections myself, putting the behavior on cue, is a legitimate way to help people remind to be in compliance. And, again, yes, maybe they should know they should be doing this. And I know of a case or two where someone tried to fake something in the interim so that by the time the person got there, everything was kind of repaired. As long as the tank's not leaking or the pipe's not leaking, I still would say whatever it takes to get the operator to kind of get their act together. I'm coming in 30 days. The guy's like, okay, well, better get my training certificate, better get my ATG certification. That may necessarily not be a bad thing, but I do like the idea of letting people know in advance what's expected of them. Kind of quiet out there. I would encourage you, please, to if you get a chance to, I can send everyone a copy afterwards, the article of I don't train, I enforce, just to be able to think about different ways you could incentivize people. Check with your HR, check with your enforcement division, see how applicable some of the stuff I think is implementable if given the chance. I will be providing a series of other webinars throughout 2023. I'm very excited to announce we've got Mark Barolo, EPA's lead UST regulator nationwide from Washington, D.C. Him and I will be having a conversation about where the UST program is going, and look forward to some more great speakers here for free in 2023. If you do have suggestions about topics you'd like to see or speakers you'd like to see covered, give me a shout. I'll see if I can have that arranged.
I guess, Ben, I'm curious if, what you were just saying. So let's say someone knows an inspection's coming up. They're like, oh, shoot, we don't have some operators trained. We better get on that before they get here, right? So they take care of that, which is great. Could there then be a conversation that's, I'm really glad to see you did that, but in the future, really make sure you do it in this time, something bad could happen, right? Before then. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious too, if that could lead to that kind of conversation about, it's great you took care of that, but in the future, make
But in
sure.
the future, yeah. Thank you for getting trained. I saw you got trained after I told you you needed it. There was a gap where you were not trained. That's uncool, but you did it. So this time I'll let you have it. Next time it's a $500 fine or something like that.
Yeah, that seems like it could be a worthwhile conversation.
Yeah. I mean, that's where like a scale of things comes in, or kind of a la carte menu choice comes in, instead of just like,
you did well. Here's how you could do better, right? Kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious. I don't know if it's reasonable to ask people, is there anything, because you've mentioned before you got some sort of negative feedback to this. I think all of this makes wonderful sense personally, but you've gotten some negative feedback before, people that are used to just, shooting the dog, or it's just all about punishment and all this other stuff sounds silly to them or something. I'm just curious if there's anyone here today who thinks that this doesn't make sense, or, is there anybody who's listening to this going, no, I don't agree or anything? Not to start a conflict, but
Yeah, really.
just kind of curious. Yeah. If there's anyone that would have anything they would add to counter anything you said, sort of, I don't know how to put it, but. Donna's written in here again.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, again, letting people know up front what you need just makes it so much easier. I mean, if inspectors can literally get to more sites if they can motivate people to have it ready when they get there. I've talked to a lot of inspectors. I go to the site, the person wasn't there, the person has no idea what I'm talking about, the person I was supposed to talk to wasn't there. It's like, you kind of did that to yourself, man. I mean, like, if you let them know you're coming, then all that can be avoided. You do need to kind of ask. I mean, compliance should be more important than enforcement, and people do respond differently to different behavior modification techniques, for sure.
But that sounds really efficient. Yay, Pacific Northwest, where we live. I mean, to tell people ahead of, to encourage people to send you the paperwork ahead of time and spend less time on site, that's efficient with everybody's time, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yay on the Washington and Oregon inspectors for their process. That's great.
And again, I mean, missing a suspected release, hiding records, the person who puts tape over the tank monitor because they don't know what the blinking red light means, or people who, intentionally hide a leak. I mean, that's a different creature altogether. But for your kind of garden variety UST compliant stuff, I think there's a scale out here that can be used.